So, Dave, what do you think about doing a video on metals in
Oh,
D&D?
Slayer! Yeah!
No, Dave. Metals in D&D.
Yeah, metal. Megadeth, Anthrax, Pantera. I'm all about it, Ted.
Dave, pull it together, man. We're talking about mythical metals, D&D, Mithril, Adamantium.
Oh, yeah, I like that stuff too. Metal and D&D. Sure. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Dave, and today I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted. And today, as I said, we're going to talk about mythical metals in D&D.
Do you want practical D&D content you can drop right in your game?
If the answer is yes, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and attune to that notification bell so you don't miss a single video.
Alright, so we're talking about metals in Dungeons & Dragons, particularly mythical metals like Mithril, Adamantine, sometimes referred to as Adamant as well. You have cold iron, you have silvered weapons, and you have Bashk that was added later for Eberron.
Yeah, and I know some people, they wind up adding, stuff that's homebrew. I mean, if you look at, some of the stuff online, I know we use some resources, looking this up, and there is a whole list of special property material, especially if you move away from the metals that you can find.
Yeah, especially a lot of these were introduced in 3rd edition. I was actually surprised there weren't more, to be honest. I thought there were going to be a lot more, especially ones that are like more well known and that maybe I forgot. But I was like, no, really, it's like a half a dozen ish, and that's it. And they all kind of did like a similar thing in the earlier editions of the game, and that was to bypass or get past specific resistances. I mean, it still does that as well. But we don't have DR the way we did in 3rd edition. And there was definitely a lot more, I think, like, gradation would be a way to define it.
It used to, earlier editions, you either had this or it didn't do any damage whatsoever. You had some where it was like, all right, if you didn't have it, they just subtracted some amount. 5th edition does make it a lot easier. You're either immune to everything but, or you're resistant to anything that's not X. So it makes it a lot more interesting. But I think that, a lot can be said about having, these different materials, these different properties. And when you really look at them, they can add so much more to your game. If Mithril, winds up being the super precious metal that is just loved by the elves, sought after by the dwarves, you could do a lot with it.
We're talking about all these different metals and their mythical properties in nature. But speaking of things that are mythical, let's talk about the humble wood.
All right, so the humble wood is a new product that's coming to Kickstarter. Is put out by the wonderful people over at the Deck of Many, and they got some great stuff that is coming out. If you happen to be familiar with them from our earlier videos, we talked about the free PDF that you could actually get on their website, and it was over 70 pages that you could download. From that, you were getting things like new races, new spells, new magic items, new feats, new backgrounds, and a lot of great stuff that was all for free. The responses on that was so great that they decided that they were going to build it up, blow it up, and make it even better. Make it be a product that you could put out there. If you want to go check it out, that Kickstarter is going to offer great things like reference cards, in deck form. You could even get a miniature related to some of the stuff there. They're going to do a plush. So there's a lot of great things that are going to go out there. If you want to explore this great setting, with adventure material and campaign setting material, go check out the Kickstarter. It's going to be awesome.
There is going to be tons of player options, DM options, and also it's only fair to mention this video has been sponsored by Humblewood Kickstarter, the Deck of Many. They have great products over there. You're going to want to go check them out. Go show the sponsors some love.
All right, so let's dive back into our metals.
All right, so I want to say with 5e D&D, they really have kind of simplified our mythical metals. They don't do quite as much because it's 5e is much more of an all or nothing type of system. If we look at 5e and we look at Mithril, it's great for medium and heavy armor. It's going to remove any strength requirements. It's going to remove any disadvantage for your stealth checks. And as far as the metal itself, it looks nice and shiny and bright, almost like polished silver.
So, from a lore perspective, going throughout the ages of D&D, I mean, even so much in the Lord of the Rings, movie where they were calling it Mithril, it is almost a standout, recognizable by anyone who knows anything about working metals, because as Dave says, it has that polished silver, that gleam, that almost glow to it, just based on the metal itself. It typically has always weighed half as much as any other metal. So, like, you could wear a chain shirt made of mithril underneath clothes. And I do not recommend wearing any kind of chain armor against your skin. It's not actually pleasant, especially if you've got, hair on your chest.
Well, that's because you haven't worn Mithril, Ted.
Well, I have not worn a shirt of mithril armor. That is true. But that's what it says. Supple, so light that you could wear it underneath clothes and have someone not even realize it.
So adamant or adamantine, not to be confused with adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton and claws and the Marvel universe, is great for medium and heavy armor. It's going to negate critical hits against you. Now, the lure part of it is, it falls from the skies in meteorites, and that's where the deposits can be found. But in the Forgotten Realms setting, deep beneath the world, beneath the earth, in the Underdark, it's mined by dwarves and drow.
And because Dave's not going to try and say Menzoberranzan.
Menzoberranzan, that place.
But wealthy drow, the high nobles in Menzoberranzan, typically use this black metal, as a status effect, that if they're wearing the armor and using the weapons.
Adamantine weapons, they're useful because there is a slew of monsters that are immune or resistant to damage from non-magical weapons that aren't adamantine.
So there are 16 of them that have this, 3 of which are completely immune to damage that aren't adamantine. So that definitely helps you out. Specifically, there are 2 that are not constructs, and that's your gargoyle and your 4-armed gargoyle. So those guys, definitely going to be helpful if you're swinging some adamantine weapons.
Next, we have silvered weapons, which isn't actually the metal per se that you're making the weapons out of. It's more of a treatment that goes on other weapons that already exist where you're coating them with silver. But it's not any silver. Usually it's like a very pure and blessed silver.
So in earlier editions of D&D, there were literally, you would make weapons out of silver. They were completely inferior to weapons, and you would wind up doing less damage. You can only use so many strikes with it before it would need to get retooled or reforged. And I guess the players have kind of rebelled against the system enough that they're like, well, how can we do this and still have the ability to affect it? So in the later editions, it was wound up changing to, like, your weapons were edged in this blessed silver, and this was used to overcome damage reduction on your were creatures, your were critters, your lycanthropes.
There's also, I believe, some demons and devils that fall into this category as well. But yeah, mostly it was the were creatures. Next, we have cold iron, which surprisingly doesn't really come up in 5e D&D, but existed in previous editions as well as myth and folklore.
So cold iron is really interesting, and actually having studied a little bit of blacksmithing.
I thought you were gonna say theology.
No. My wife and I actually watch Forged in Fire, a show about blacksmithing and metalcraft and that kind of stuff. When you hear Smith talking about beating on cold iron and how hard it is to make cold iron move, it was pretty interesting to do the research. So the idea was that when you heat metal up so much, it winds up losing some of the aspect of the metal itself. So when you work metal at a colder temperature. Yeah, it takes longer, but that natural element remains in the metal and is used against creatures of a fey origin. And therefore, like throughout mythology, when you talk about, fey touching metal, it's that concept of cold iron that they're really having anathema to.
Right. Everything Ted said, except for not so much in 5e.
Well, in 5e, correct. But if you wanted to add that back into your world, you could have, a whole new type of material or forging process, add that into anything that's already Fey, and you can then enrich your world with these properties.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, we have one of the mythical metals that was added later to D&D in third edition. The Eberron campaign setting was Bayesk, and Bayesk was a purplish hued metal that was very effective for fighting and combating creatures from the plane of Zoriat, which are basically like aberrations type monsters.
Yeah, creatures not native to the prime material plane, and it was really cool. It was really interesting, and I really like when they start. When you add these extra things, because it really seems to make a world stand out. So like that was one of the things that I really liked about Eberron is the things that they pulled, and every aspect that you'd want out of a game or out of a culture was there.
And again, we kind of circle back to 5e. It's really hard to add these metals in mechanically. I mean, role play, story elements, easy. It's easy, no problem. But when really the only mechanics you have to work with, is it magic, is it not magic, and pluses and minuses that way. Well, not minuses, but pluses that way, or advantage or disadvantage. It makes it really hard to be like, oh, this is just a sword made out of adamantium, or adamantine, I should say. Don't sue us, Marvel. But it doesn't actually do anything, right? Unless you look at the resistances. Now, in previous editions of the game, we actually created our own metal that we used in Ulthgania. We still do. We're still working out the kinks and the bugs on what exactly does it do when you use it. And we made shark steel. Shark steel is harvested from the plates of a bullet, and then they have a process of bonding that and alloying it with other metals that they can then work. But it kind of makes this like electric blue, almost like an oil slick kind of look, sheen to the metal. So armors and weapons will be made of it, and it's only made in one place in our world. Now we have to kind of figure out, well, what exactly does that mean now that we're using 5th edition rules?
Sometimes when you look at what these things are, regardless of whether the item is, we want to use some of the earlier, connotations or, phraseology, you've got masterwork or, something that's really great. Sometimes warriors just want to present better. You draw their weapon, it's like, that looks cool. What is that? And when you as a DM, or even as a player, you draw something that stands out, that's going to be cool. So sometimes you could have a weapon look better or an armor look better by having one of these properties or one of these materials made of it, and it's going to make the players question like, oh, what is that? So shark steel could absolutely be one of those things. In our campaign world, we have Stoneholm, and the ground surrounding this mountain range is loose soil that is littered with lots and lots of belays. It is a rite of passage for the dwarves to go out and try and slay one and bring it back. And if there's the carcass has enough material, they can actually get to make some shark steel out of it, which is cool.
Maybe we bring back masterwork items, and the difference between a +1 masterwork longsword and a magic +1 longsword is the simple fact one of them will penetrate resistance and immunity and one will not. So that might be an area where we can look at. But the question is, what are you folks doing in your games? How are you using mythical metals for D&D or whatever game you're playing? We got a place where we can discuss that is down in the comments below. While you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
On your way down there, don't forget to check out the link to the Kickstarter for Humblewood.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.